Welcome back to the Arcana Llama podcast 4. Winterspell drops next week, so we're taking a look at the set 10 better, how it evolved, and looking at how we can take some suggestions for that for the format to come. Then we'll look at our top 5 favorite cards together, and then we'll finish off with a review of Justice's recent Hong Kong run. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so when we look at the meta back across the entire set, right, we can spot really the trends between what decks started strong and what decks ended strong. So on the left here, we've got the sort of average meta share between the starting 4 weeks and the ending 4 weeks up to and including DLC Richmond. And you can see the strong, by the end of the format, it looks about as we expect, right? Purple Steel on top, Blurple, Green Blue, Dogs, and then all of the decks that we're seeing a moderate amount of play. Where it gets a little bit more interesting here is the contrast between what started strong and what ended strong, right? So Blurple, a deck that was really on top of things in set 9, actually came out of the gates pretty weak. People didn't think that it was going to be a strong deck, but it found out that ultimately it still was. Blue Steel came out of the gates really strong and then saw, a pretty massive drop off in its popularity. The other big outlier here is Yellow Purple, right? Which was functionally not a deck at the start of that meta, and then actually grew to become still a niche pick, but one that was growing quite rapidly towards the end of that format. Looking over to the visual on the right, we have the conversion average for each of these ink pairs. So this is how well they were converting into top cut meta shares versus their general population meta share, right? So a value greater than 1 means that the top 8 share for a deck was higher than its meta share. So looking at where we started to begin with, Purple Steel just dominating this table here during those first couple of weeks of this format. That was the only deck that anyone was talking about, and it was performing very well at some of the early events. Green Blue and Green Purple were giving it a good run for its money. The sort of Mo Shamblin tempo mid-range Green Purple list is the one that was seeing the most play. It seemed to have the most potential at that point. Blurple not doing very well. Red Purple hadn't yet sort of found its feet yet. Big drop off for Amber Steel compared to where it was in set 9 as well. And, you've got Dogs just kind of not doing great, not doing terribly. Same for Blue Steel. A 1.08 means that it was treading water just fine. It was even doing a little bit better. But by the point in the format, this was already starting to tail off, right? It started quite high while the meta was so heavily Purple Steel dominated, and then it saw that begin to slip as Green Blue started to find its feet. Now, when we look at the end of the format, there's a pretty big shift in our best performers. Yellow Purple and Green Yellow really found their crowns as being the best performing decks of the format at the end. Dogs consistently at sort of major events sees not particularly high meta share, but very strong conversion from the players who have learned the deck and are getting the most out of it. Yellow Purple as well just proved to be an incredibly reliable pick that could be either the mid-range variant or the Monstro combo variant, both of which brought sort of a new angle for Amethyst into the meta and had very strong tools to win the Amethyst mirrors. So that sort of became a bit of a crowd favorite at the end there for players who had a chance to keep testing on that and see where the format was going beyond the DLC. Green Blue stayed strong throughout the whole set. I think it was a real setting the bar for us in this set in retrospect. Blurple found its feet as well, started to pull decent numbers, and then you sort of see the trail off there between all the decks that didn't really make it and weren't the best decks of the format. Decks like Ruby Amethyst, Amethyst Steel, Sapphire Steel, these were all sort of, either niche popular picks or in Purple Steel's case, the most popular pick, but it was not performing well by the time we reached the end of the set. I think this is really something to do with like with 25% of the room being purple steel, all the purple steel players are playing to beat each other and not playing to beat any of the other decks that are beating them reliably. The blurples and the green blues. I even think green yellow has an extremely acceptable purple steel matchup. It does not feel like you're at a disadvantage at all. And yellow purple, of course, is just a deck that feasts on purple steel, both configurations.
Yeah.
So it
Looking
ended
at
up finding
these
itself.
looking at these numbers, there seems to be almost a story that we can take from that, where we have the Amethyst Steel was obviously the most represented deck throughout the entire format, just looking at the average of the meta share. But then, as you've said, it falls off quite heavily in terms of the conversion ratio towards the end. What can we, as a person looking at this, what would they take away from that, from looking at the beginning of a format and then the end of the format and the difference those two might have with each other?
So the big thing is the format grows and changes over time, right? If you were a purple steel player, you probably started the format feeling very strong, and based on the numbers, there's a very good chance you remained a purple steel player for the rest of the format. The problem is the deck was no longer the best performer by that point. And so if you want to be taking the best event to any given event that you go to, you couldn't stay on that deck, but people did. And so you need to ask yourself, as you're going into events, what it is you want to achieve and whether you think you're taking the best steps to do that. If you were looking to win DLC Richmond, I don't see how you could have taken purple steel, but a significant portion of the room still chose to. You can see that part of the thing is you have to keep an eye on the data and on the trends in the meta as time goes on, and you need to stay on top of your testing. I think green blue started off, as like a bit of a fringe deck coming into the format and very quickly found itself to be the pace setter. And if you did not understand your purple steel green blue matchup, didn't really understand how poorly positioned purple steel was into the deck, you were probably liable to keep playing it even though you should switch off to something else.
Okay. So then thinking about this just a little bit more, if you're a player and you're trying to think what deck you want to bring going into set 11 Winterspell meta, when we look at some of the upcoming events, so like we've got Axion in the UK coming up, we've got Ghent for the DLC in EU, I know we've got Ink coming up in the Americas. What do you think would be the best type of deck to take? Is it the best performing decks from the last sets, or in that case, would it be dogs? And then as we move away from the kind of first 4 weeks, do you think you have to start looking at different decks that are starting to creep up? Maybe they get showcased like the Zanzayed Yurple list that we saw for the CCG. Do we have to look at those type of decks? Is that the lesson to take from this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things to be mindful of. Generally, whenever a new set comes out, you can shortcut the most of your testing by just assuming that the best decks of the new format are going to be the best decks of the old format. And that almost always proves to be true. It's true enough that you can save a lot of time by focusing on taking a shell that was performing well at the end of the format and just finding the best new cards to put in it. So, in this case, that might be something like dogs and picking out just like the new. Uh, well, we'll talk about some of the cards I think later on in our top selection. Give you a little bit of a spoiler there, but by finding the obvious slot-ins to replace the worst cards in any deck from the previous set with the best new cards that can go in over them, you generally end up on day one with a very powerful deck that you should already be quite familiar with the play patterns for. Where that starts to change is over time, people will debut new decks and we will start to see how the new builds of each of these decks perform in the new meta. And so if you want to be on top of how things are changing, let's say you're going to Ghent. If you're in the US, you're probably playing Ink. If you're in the UK, you'll be playing at Axion most likely. Those events will give you a great insight into how the meta is starting to shape up. And we'll obviously talk about that here on the podcast. I'll pull the data every week. But that'll be like the trends you have to observe going in to try and get an idea about what people will be playing when we actually reach the DLC. We haven't really talked about it, but also there's DLC Australia next weekend, and that is on set 11. So that will be the sort of first indication of what is to come for Axion the week after and Ink the week after that. So stay on top of that, right? We'll talk about it as we come to it.
Yeah, there. I know a lot of people when they're looking at the type of decks that they want to play, it can be quite difficult for them to figure out what's going to be useful. Because, for example, if we'll talk about Axion, which is I think the week before or 2 weeks before Ghent, and we get the data from that, if we see the decks that are performing really well, it can often feel like a trap to take those best performing decks and run into them in Ghent, because by that point, people have started putting tech cards in plays to beat them. We saw this with like Wasabi for the Chromacon build of Dogs. When we're looking at this as a player, and presuming that you're not one of like the 30 best deck builds in the world, what can they use? What resources should they be looking at in order to make that prediction for what deck should go into the meta? Because by all accounts, it seems to be that using the best decks of the format is the right pick. But then if they start seeing things come up that tech cards or that decks that have been tested underground that aren't as publicly available, they might get punished for that a little bit. And I think that can be quite difficult for a new player, especially to try and make that call. So do you have any advice in that regard?
Yes. Don't think about any of that. The best thing you can do, I think, in that situation is focus more on your play than on your build. So this is something that DKP has talked about on Twitter. Gotten some pushback from other players, but I actually agree with him completely. I did not build anything innovative for playing dogs in this format. I just bought Diego's guide, who is the dogs guy, and read through it, practiced the deck, learned how to play it from there, and basically played the completely stock build from the guide with like, there were 6 flexible slots that I played some of my preferences in. That is generally the best thing you can do, right? Like pick a deck that is a good deck. That's something you have to consider and do your research on. The most popular deck is not always the best deck, but find a deck that you think is good and play it well. And that is, for a lot of players, even for players who are moderately experienced, that's going to be the thing that rewards you the most.
So speaking of some of those decks, we do have a couple of cards that you and I have chosen. So we've each picked 5 cards that we think are going to impact the meta in some way to varying degrees. So if you're, I'll start off.
Yep.
Yep. So my first card is Marching After Battle. It's a forecast action inkable song for Ruby, and it just says that if a character was banished this turn, you can draw 2 cards. And the reason I've picked this is Ruby has unanimously had terrible card draw throughout the inception of the game, and it's often had to leverage itself on the combination that it's being paired up with. So we've seen that with Sapphire with the likes of Haram, or Amethyst with the likes of, Friends on the Other Side, Rabbit, those type of packages. It's nice to see some card draw in Ruby, and with it being a forecast song, it's not that difficult for them to sing. Like if they're using a lot of the ramp package, they can just go straight into Cinderella with this if you're on like red blue. So it's a really good cost in there, I think, and the ability to just draw 2 cards almost. You almost don't care about the banish effects because Ruby's always banishing something with the likes of its rush or its single target removal like Horseman stuff. I think it's a really good package that we're going to see most Ruby decks adopting outside of the ones that are paired up with really powerful combinations like Amethyst.
Yep. I think that's a great pick. I've just been calling this card Red Friends because even with the condition to have to banish something, this is just a song that you sang to draw 2 cards most of the time. And that is pretty good. It is, in a lot of ways, not Friends. If you top deck this card late game and you don't have a way on board to banish something, this card's actually kind of mediocre. But I do think this is a big pickup for Ruby decks to try and shore them up and give them some of the consistency that they've been missing to date. The only reason I probably didn't pick this is just because Ruby is in such a bad state right now that I don't think this card necessarily fixes it on its own, but I like this card a lot. I think this is a very nice tool to have, and both in Constructed and in Infinity, this card probably has a place.
I do think that Ruby is in a much better state this set since the rotation that it's ever been, and a lot of that has to do with cards like this, and also some of the new cards that are coming through, which I won't show just now because it's one of the picks that I picked. but like getting that card draw outside of Amethyst, because at the moment it feels like very much the rotation. Amethyst has dominated the card draw meta, and if you weren't pairing your deck with Amethyst, then you had to do something completely broken, like Dogs was winning in 4 turns or going bust, in my opinion. So it's nice to see some of that love spread out to different color combinations. But yeah, so that's mine. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about your card then?
Yeah, so my pick for number 5 is Mickey Mouse Snowboard Ace. 6 cost uninkable, 4/6. Quest for 2. Uh, his ability, Slippery Slope. When you play this character and when he leaves play, each opponent chooses and discards a card. This card is so finely balanced that I can't decide if it's like really good or kind of just okay, and toes that line perfectly, right? I think if this was a 6/6, it would probably be crazy. If it quested for more, if it cost less or was inkable, right? Any of these like minor changes, and this card starts to look really, really powerful. But as is, being a fairly consistent, like make your opponent discard 2 when it plays and leaves, that's just good. Those are like a good, strong effect into every deck, held back only by the fact that, it's a 6 cost uninkable. So that's something you kind of have to play around. But, with new cards like um, the green item that lets you banish a character and play one that costs 2 more, that might let you cheat him out earlier on. There's like other plays you can do where you play him and then he can sing Mode Knows Best on himself to bounce himself back to hand and play him again. We're doing like purple bounce things, but the thing you're doing is making your opponent discard a card 3 times in 2 turns. Is it going to be good? Hard to say. I'm excited to try and make it good.
It's not one that was on my radar personally. We've always seen that these type of effects where, you know, it comes in, does something straight away, and when it leaves, it does something. They're really strong. They've been better warping in the past. The obvious comparison is Genie, Merlin Rabbit from set 3, set 2. That was a really strong ability, but to be fair, that had card draw inbuilt into it, which is probably one of the reasons why it was so built. That said, we've seen discard packages before, like especially during the bookie meta, where we were discarding our opponents down and kind of taking the hand sizes away. I do feel like the card might be too overcosted in that sense. 6 ink is a lot to get to, and if you're not playing this in like a blue shell, the earliest that this can come down obviously is turn 6, unless you're using the Webby shift package. By that point,
Well, there's a cood to get this guy discounted in on your 4 ink turn as well. I
that's
think,
fair. I don't.
and then there's
Is
also other
is that
discounts if he's in the
like?
yellow deck.
Do we think that that's a strong enough package though? Because what are you doing? I guess the question comes down to how strong is discard in the current format. We've seen some discard be used from the rotation, but they did lose a lot of cards. I think Prince John was a massive loss for any discard type of deck because you can't generate that card advantage from almost kind of 2 for 1 your opponent. If discard becomes popular, it could definitely upset some of the balance, especially when people are holding like the one-off demoter in hand and trying to get maximum value. But outside of that scenario, I feel like it doesn't do enough for me personally. I would prefer to see this at maybe like a 4 cost or even a 5 cost, but with like slightly worse stats so I can get it down earlier. Because I feel like that point in the game is where you really get the main benefit from it, right? Is that turn 4, turn 5 line. Turn 6 just feels a little bit too slow for me.
Yeah, and I'm less excited about this card if you're playing it on curve, but I think there's a lot of ways that you can get around that with some of the stuff that's been revealed. So, I don't necessarily have a build decided for this yet, but like you said, we shifted to a meta in set 10 that was very Demona centered and no longer playing for like the big hands like Blurple decks were when they were playing second star to the right in set 9. So I think there's actually absolutely room for discard as like an archetype to be relevant in the meta. It's very good into everything, and I think someone just hasn't quite found that deck yet. Maybe this is a card that'll help us get there.
That's fair. So we're going to move straight into my next card, which we did cover towards the end of the video last week. So it's Isis Vanderchill. She's a 4-cost, uninkable, 4/4 quest for 1 character, and she simply says when you play this character, you may exert a chosen opposing character. Um, that a lot of what I said last week still stands, but I'll repeat it here in case you're a new listener. I think this card is amazing. The ability, especially in like Blurple decks or Yerple decks, if you're running cheap ways to get this out, if you play this on turn 3 and tapping key resource sideways for most opposing decks and then challenge it with something else like a Rafiki, that feels like a really big swing. The obvious comparison for me is like blue-green decks where you tap the Clarabelle sideways so that they can't get the shift off quick enough. Sometimes Alta is a little bit too slow. This one turn does actually matter in those cases. Or against dogs, where you're tapping something sideways and challenging into it just so that they have to spend more resources to go into tramp. That slight difference, while minor, it doesn't feel like a lot on paper, actually changes the entire way that a game plays. We're seeing it with Amber Steel starting to come back into this set where they they're playing Tiana again, and if you can tap like a Nala sideways when they've just played Tiana and then challenge it with a Rafiki, they're not getting as many resources when they decide to go sideways. I think this card is busted. I think a lot of people are going to be testing it. But yeah, I feel like I might be putting too many stocks on it a little bit now that I'm talking out loud. I do still think the card's busted. Do you feel the same way?
So I think in the context of, let's say we had this card in set 10 or set 9, and without any of the other cards we've seen in this set, I think this card is like game warpingly change in like impact of the exert your opponent's card's turn. In some of the early testing I've started to do for set 11, I am less confident that that is a relevant enough disruption to your opponent's plans to actually justify her slot in most decks, but it's still a very powerful effect, and I don't think it's bad. We are, this point, halfway through this rotation block, and I think it's unlikely that a card like Elsa is going to be reprinted, which means, maybe this is a card that doesn't find its time to shine in this format, but might be a lot better on come, the next rotation if we don't get Elsa back.
Yeah. Would you play a card like this in Infinity by any chance?
Ooh, probably not. I don't think Amethyst decks are very good in Infinity.
Oh, that's a hot thing. We'll move on from that one and probably come back to that at some point. Okay, so let's go here. So you've got your 4th card here.
Yep, so Pete, Ghost of Christmas Future. It's a 5-cost inkable, 5/5, quest for 1. Storyborn Ally Ghost. That ally tag is kind of nice if you're a blue steel enjoyer. Boost 1. Whenever this character quests, look at a number of cards from the top of your deck equal to the number of cards under him. Put 1 into your hand and put the rest on the bottom of your deck. This is like draw 1 to your hand every turn for blue decks into like the mid to late game. So, I mean, this is blue steel, blurple, blue yellow, whatever horrid name we're going to come up with to call that deck as we start talking about it in the weeks to come. This is a card I think is going to become like a staple in blue decks over time. Incredibly powerful effect, super good every turn, relevant tags, great stat line, it boosts for like a respectably low amount. I just think this card he's going to be really sticky and he's going to get you a lot of value. So high valuation for me.
I actually have him as one of my picks too. I think everything you said there, I would agree with. I think the fact that he is so sticky, he's almost a remove on site type of card. His effect is so inherently strong. And we've seen some comparisons like Bambi in the new set for Amber, but the specific thing with Bambi is that it's like a 3/5, so the stats on it is relevant. And also, Bambi only returns characters. Whereas this is any card, so this can be the book that you're looking for to continue, or it can be like the ink runner that you might need to get that evasive option on the field. There's a lot that this card does, and the boost for 1 is such a cheap effect that it's almost like second nature. You put this down on turn 4 because you've ramped. And then you can do like something else like a genie and boost this in the same turn and then put it sideways. And anything that's challenging into it, nearly anything in the meta game is going to be taking itself out. Oftentimes they're going to be needing to put 2 or 3 pieces into this thing. And the only real card that like gets rid of this nicely is World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which is locked to Amber. Everything else, if we're talking about things like Ramp or stuff, it's sorry, Hades or Let It Go, since we've just gotten that back with the new set, that still goes into your hand, and if there are any cards underneath it, that goes into your ramp, and if there are any cards underneath it, that also goes into your ramp, which is just more resources that you get to take advantage of. So there's a lot of things that this is doing to repress things, and it doesn't just fit into purple decks, it gives things like red, that we were talking about before, so red-blue, now has access to the Marching Off to Battle, where it has like generic card draw that it can use, and it has access to things like Pete, where it can start drawing through its cards and put those into hand. I think this is a brilliant card.
Yeah, I really like this card overall. There are some other good answers for this. I haven't selected 4-cost Uninkable Sven in my selection of cards, but I know that's something that a lot of people are interested in and they've been trying out. That does just remove an Elsa or a Genie or this Pete's. It's like a 2/3 Challenger 3 Rush evasive. So there are some other options about to deal with this, but the extra card advantage that this gives to blue red or blue steel is just really exciting. Those decks might become more relevant.
Yeah, I big agree. So as you can see, I've gone on there, so I'm going to jump straight to my second reveal, if that's okay with you, and then we'll come back and do 2 reveals for yourself. So
Yep.
I've got Sven. It's the exact card that you were talking about. I think this card is nuts. For some of the reasons you just explained, like it's a card that answers Pete very effectively, which I think is going to be a staple in the meta. I think a lot of Amethyst decks will be running Sven because he's just so well statted. He has that very, very key important word, which is evasive, so he works with Dumbo. You can play this as another 4-drop. Obviously, it's not the best 4-drop to play on turn 4 unless you want to take something out straight away, but it's a fallback that you can do for that 4-drop slot. But he's a 4-cost uninkable, 2/3 quest for 1. And he's got Rush and he's got Challenger +3. So when he's challenging, he becomes a 5/3 character. That takes out any evasive that we currently see in the metagame. That is your Vanessas with the boost underneath them. That is your Genies. That is your Elsas. That is your Dumbos. And against Elsas and Genies, he actually survives the challenge. That's a very, very relevant thing that is not to be underestimated. I think this card is amazing. I think it has a place in a lot of Amethyst decks, especially decks that can ramp him out earlier if you need. Again, I've talked about it and I'll probably keep talking about it for the next couple of weeks, but at the beginning of the format, we always see aggro like kind of be dominant and scary for most people because a lot of the cards that go into aggro are very easy to see. It's very easy to like build those lines. Being able to take out a Daisy on turn 3 without giving your opponent ink is something that Purple hasn't been able to do before. So in a deck like that, it's very nice to have that type of access, or to be able to take a Tiana out if you have the ink to pay for it. I think this card is amazing. I would put it slightly just above Isis because I think that one of them is only good when you have other cards on the field, whereas Sven is always good in a vacuum because, he has that synergy or he has the ability to challenge.
Yeah, I think Sven is super nice. I love that they're printing more of these Amethyst cards that are uninkable, bring the color back into line a little bit with some of the others. I like the way that this card has its power level, right, split across the fact that it is both uninkable and it's not like a 5/3, it's a Challenger 3, 2/3, right? So it's very good at removing things and then not as powerful on the trade back, but still is evasive. So it's not just like it gets taken out by anything. It's just a really well designed card. I like it.
I think it's very balanced as well, right? Because I think it's easy to evaluate a card for what it does for the deck that it's put into, but when you take a kind of broader sense of a set design, there's some cards that we've seen, like Grab Your Bows, which is a Ruby 5-cost song that banishes something with 2 power or less. the fact that we're still bringing powerful cards like this into the format, but there is the counterplay of like Ruby being able to banish this with 2 costs or less, or things being able to challenge into this because it only has the 3 willpower, I think is a good direction that Lorcana is going to, because we've had like some power creep in the past or something, but I think that overall this is like a really good example of what a balanced card looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's move into your third card there. So, oh, Fox. Love Foxes.
Yep. So this is Todd. Knows all the tricks. 7 cost inkable, 6/6, quest for 2. He shifts for 5 and is evasive, and his ability reads, twice during your turn, whenever this character is chosen for an action or item's ability, you may ready him. So that is one of the most interesting abilities I've read on a card in a long time. This just gets me excited to try and make this card do like silly combo-y things where you pop a medal of heroes on him to give him +2 lore. Let's say you've got 3 of them on the field. His ability restriction to ready himself twice is to ready himself twice, not the first 2 times you target him with an ability, right? So let's say you've got 3 medal of heroes out. You pop one, you give him 4 lore, quest for 4. Pop the second, give him 6 lore, ready him up, quest for 6 to 10. Pop the third one, give him 8 lore, ready him up, quest for 8. You quested for 18 in that turn. That's making a pretty extreme example there of some of the things you can do with this card. There's the new song that obviously is a featured combo piece, education or elimination. Targets a character, give them +1 lore for the rest of this turn. So does exactly what you want to do to sort of make him quest for more while also readying him back up. I think it's also just a beautiful card. It has a lovely enchanted as well. I don't think there's an obvious, like, this card demands a new deck to be built to try and facilitate him. But I think it gives a really exciting amount of lore pressure in a sort of top end green package to justify exploring things like a yellow green mid range deck, yellow or green purple, as maybe that's fast enough to let you control the game early and then rush out late, or even something different like red green, right? Has some synergy pieces with this and other high lore questing combo pieces. Maybe it's finally Christmas time.
I do love the card art. I love the enchanted. It's an enchanted I'm going to be chasing for the rest of the set. I am more hesitant on its ability. I think it's a really strong ability, please don't get me wrong. But the fact that this is as expensive as it is, the natural conclusion that I come to is like, what else could I be playing? You're absolutely correct in saying that this has to have an entire deck built around it, and I think some of the really good deck builders will probably look at this and give it a try and see if they can make something broken. However, we've kind of, not directly, but we've kind of seen things like this in the past with the Baloo, the one that it has the ability to like ready himself and then quest and have those combo piece type decks. And my concern with that type of playstyle is it often feels like the deck is doing nothing until it wins. And in a format as fast as we're potentially moving into, I don't know if you can get away with that as much, especially in a color such as green. The ability requires a lot of build around it in terms of like targeting it with like those medals, which aren't doing anything by themselves. So then if you start trying to kind of hybrid build the deck where you've got some removal or some stalling, and then you've got this late game package, like you really need that package to be super good. And it's not like Tamatoa from the first rotation, where everything you're playing is already benefiting that and accelerating you to that game plan, like the Porpskulls that's drawing and has got you that engine, and then you just slam down a Lucky Dime with Tamatoa and then like win out of nowhere. This is kind of telegraphed in a way, because you've got to either set up the shift, in which case they can see, oh, if you've got the small one, you're probably playing the shift, or if you just play this the first turn, then it's not doing anything that turn itself. So love the card, love the ability. I don't know if it's competitive enough.
I think those are deck building challenges to solve. It's a 6/6 evasive that quests for 2 on its own, which means it's got a pretty high bar, and the nature of solitaire combo decks is that you do need to find that place where you kind of don't need to care about what you're doing in the early game, and then you just win out from behind by having stabilized to get there. And I think some of the tools like education or elimination, the other half of that card says, or choose and banish a damaged character on a 4-cost inkable song. That's a removal piece. That's also a combo piece.
Would you
Uh,
use this in Brainiac? Obviously, we've got some experience with making Brainiac. I'm just thinking, like, is this a card that we could use as almost a way to cheat out a load of lore very quickly in 1 turn or 2 turns and just kind of put the pressure on your opponent? Because at the moment, Brainiac, the way that we've built it in the past, is very much you have to control the entire game, basically delete all the resources from your opponent through things like bend to my will. And then you quest very slowly towards the finish line because most of the stuff you're playing is like questing for 1 with some stuff questing for 2. Is there an avenue for a card like this in that type of deck?
I think so, but I think the deck would look different to what we've historically understood it to be. And I'm not sure it's the best tool if that is your sole objective. If we take a look at my number 2 pick here, there's another card that does something kind of similar. This is Mulan, Resourceful Recruit, 2-cost inkable, Emerald card, 1/4. Her ability reads, whenever this character quests, gain lore equal to her strength to a maximum of 6 lore. So that's a card that can gain a lot of lore very quickly. You can support her with +5 attack, and she quests for 6. This is a card that in, I was going to say Crab and Infinity, but Crab gives Challenger, so that doesn't work. But there's the new Ruby song that is, a 2-cost song, give a character +5 strength, clearly designed to have a very telegraphed combo piece here. You could do some combination of have another character sing that song, she quests for 6, and then you play You Came Back, ready her up, quest for another 6. You've
Does
just
the
quested for 12 on maybe turn 3 at the earliest.
does the card is it only on your turn that it gets that ability, or is it generalized? So when you give it like +5 and it's at 6 lore, it quests for 6 straight away. So does it get this 6 lore picks, or is it only that you gain the resources after you quest?
It's you gain when she quests, you gain the lore.
Okay. I was just thinking as you were describing it, I was thinking to myself, like, what would happen if like Red Purple was playing the song that gave it +5 and then had the Pocahontas that quested and then chose it, but I don't think that would work in that case with how the card
Yeah,
reads. Yeah.
no.
And no, it's a very, very powerful card. We again spoke about this a little bit last week, and I confessed, and I'll confess again, that this card terrifies me. I think it's going to be very dominant in the first couple of weeks of the meta. And I think that when you're deck building, you need to be looking at things that can either keep this in check or try and stop it from gaining its second effect. I am concerned the decks like this are going to be maybe too fast and there isn't enough counterplay around them. There's a card that I've picked as my last one that kind of accelerates this a little bit for just kind of throwing your hand onto the field and going, what are you going to do about it? And in that type of case, there is really the only type of decks that can beat it quick enough, in my opinion, the same type that are playing like Under the Sea and also dumping their hand and trying to get singers down, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah,
The
I think we should reveal these last 2 cards, actually, because
Yeah.
I have a feeling we picked the same card
Oh,
here.
what do you know? What a surprise. So just for the
Well,
audio
surprise for
listeners,
me, yeah, this is the Willow Tree, Grandmother Willow, Ancient Advisor. Fun story. I wanted to showcase this last week because I thought this card was very good. And what did you say to me?
I
It's
said we've
basically
got
just
too many
Lantern.
cards, we're not doing it.
Yeah, so times have changed now. It's a week later on, and I guess we both got the highlight for this card, right? 2-cost uninkable amber card. 1/2. Quest for 1 has the ability, once during your turn, you may pay 1 less for the next character you play this turn. This card, if you've been on Twitter this week, you've probably seen many players very angry about this card. And that's normally a clue that a card is very good.
Yeah, I don't know if some of the discourse regarding around it in Twitter is fair. I know a lot of people are already asking for this card to be banned. They're saying it's completely broken. It's a tier 0 card. Obviously, it has issues. It's uninkable. is an issue. It does. There's been some comparison to it being reference to like Sail the Azurite Sea. I think Sail the Azurite Sea personally, and anybody can chill like this. I think that's a way more broken card because Sail the Azurite Sea always replaces itself. It always draws a card and lets you do that thing. You obviously don't want to top deck it later into a game, but it can always do something to try and get around that. Grandmother Willow is strong. Yes, I'm not saying it's not. It's much better than Lantern in my opinion because the ability to have that effect to work towards Under the Sea, the ability for it to quest out itself when you're kind of dumping your hand, it's an amazing card. It does have negatives. If you top deck this at the end of the game and you need to like remove something to get yourself one more turn, or you're like looking for a two quester and you pull this, you're not happy ever. This is a card that gets worse as the game goes on, I believe. And well, that's my opinion. I think it gets worse as the game goes on, and you kind of only really want to see this in those first 4 turns, because past that point, card draw starts to become quite premium, and if you're running cards like this, your game plan, to me, this screams, I want to play like a very low curve. So we don't often play cards that are just kind of pulling a ton of cards into our hand. Now, maybe we're playing things like the Grandmother Willow 4-cost uninkable action that allows us to draw a card every single time we quest. Outside of scenarios like that, I think this is very good for setting up those early turns, but not much else.
I mean, that's true on paper. This is not a brilliant late game top deck. I don't think that matters in the kind of deck you want to play this in. And there's even some cases where it's like, as long as you have other cards, you're not purely top decking, where this is fine. This discounts all of the other cards you want to play. If you're playing this in Amber Steel, you can play this in a dock for 3 ink and draw 2 more cards. Or for 4 ink, you can play this and the new Nani, which very nearly made my list. 3-cost character. When you play her, look at the top 4, add a 2-cost or lower character to your hand. That card is very, very powerful. Probably deserves to be on my list over something like the Mickey or maybe even the Todd. But I mean, that's a card that just, in all of these cases, getting that discounted 1 for a character you play effect is generally always relevant in lower curving decks that want to play more of their characters than they ink. And so if you have no board and you're top decking, you're kind of losing on that deck anyway, most of the time. Sometimes you might top deck Go-Go, sometimes you're going to top deck Daisy, and she's going to stick in quest for that last 2 that you need. But the reality is, most of the time, this card is totally okay to draw in your mid game because she just kind of slots onto the board for free and lets you keep doing whatever else it is you want to do.
I do see the point. I guess maybe I'm a bit more biased because I've always been like a high tempo / control player, and that's just the way that my brain gears towards these type of cards. I'm always thinking like, how do I fight out the mid-range game? The card's powerful. We've both got it choice number 1 for a reason. There's discourse over on Twitter for a reason. I just don't think that people are looking at it maybe as much as they could be. Obviously, it's a character, so it's susceptible to things that remove characters. We've already talked about horsemen being potential. We've already talked about grab your bows. We've got like fire cannons, if that's something that you want to pick. There are ways to get... I know you don't like fire cannons, but I'm just saying that there are answers to take this out. It's good for what it does, but I think it fits a niche. And that niche kind of accelerates the game plan that those decks were already trying to do, which is get things down as quickly as possible and beat your opponent before they can get enough answers onto the field. And I think in this meta, we are going to have that be the big first question is, if you're building a deck, how do you build it to stop decks like this from just dumping the hand and saying, what are you going to do about it? And as soon as that gets answered, I think we're going to see this card either fall off or only get played in those niches where they're basically trying to keep that in check and not see much development from that point.
I do not think, based on what I have seen so far, that is likely to be the case. I would probably make a prediction right now that this is going to be a relevant card in like a high tier 1 deck throughout the entire format, possibly even two. This card might make Amber Steel more relevant again. This might have application in like Amber Ruby or Amber Sapphire, but this is almost certainly going to become a staple in Dogs, and Dogs is going to remain a premier deck of this format. I don't think anything that's been printed in this new set actually does enough to not make Dogs the obvious number one deck in the format, at least in terms of power level. But, the only other deck that was going toe to toe with it in terms of conversion was yellow purple. And I think this is a card that is quite happy to slot into that deck as well. So, I think this card is going to be around to stay. Some of those decks, you cannons them and they go, cool, you're down a card. And then
Yeah.
they play
It,
something
it
that draws them
totally it,
cards.
it totally depends on whether or not the format can answer a card like this, and if it can't, this is going to dominate from start to finish. It's a very good reason to be taking Amber into the metagame. You said there that Dogs was a very good deck. When we did that analysis prior, where we were looking at some of the best performing decks at the beginning of the format, we saw that Purple Steel had a really good showing because it did really well in set 9. We've seen that Dogs was the best conversion ratios, like consistently between the two quarters, but that we're probably going to see dog players or a big uptake in dog players at the beginning of the set. So if you're looking at events like Axion or Ghent, you're going to see a lot of this card. You're going to see a lot of dogs. You're going to see a lot of this card. And like I keep saying, you need to figure out a way to either join them or beat them. And I think you're right there. There isn't a lot at the moment that I can see that beats this card easily.
Yeah, I think no matter what option you think about playing, there's just punishes for choosing to play it. I have been playing Dogs, so I guess I have a bit of a bias towards thinking that it's going to continue to be powerful in the start of the new set. But I'm waiting to be proven wrong.
And I'm hoping somebody does, because I don't want to be playing against Dogs all format. But we'll see. It's definitely something that I'm excited to see as the meta develops, and I will be on the other side. I refuse to play Dogs, or I do at the moment. And we'll see where I am in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I know you're trying to convince me. But at the moment, I like my tempo too much, so I'm hoping that I can find an answer for this. But that concludes the kind of card showcases that we have. You went to DLC Hong Kong recently. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so wow, DLC Hong Kong. I placed top 32. I was 10th seed after Swiss. I went 5-0 before IDing both my last 2 rounds. It was a best of 1 event. I played Dogs again. Almost exactly the same as last time. I just swapped to Raja for 2 Scrooge on Inkable 2 cost, and the 1 of Improvised for the 4th Dellas. That didn't really make much of a difference. Scrooge was surprisingly excellent all weekend. Hong Kong is really impressive as a city. It's almost exactly everything that it's promised to be. I had a wonderful time walking around, eating all of the great food while I was there, just checking out the city. It looks gorgeous. It is, a dense mixed-use urban sprawl, so you're always able to just walk around between things. There's, all kinds of shops around, and it was just a really nice city, and the event was excellent. It was in a sort of a grand ballroom in a hotel nearby. There were 440 something people who attended, and just like a really great environment. A lot of people came up and spoke to me, met players from other regions who had traveled in, right? There were a lot of usual faces from teams like World Class Cards and the Rare Hunters. But, I also met groups who were traveling in from Australia or from the Philippines, and everyone was lovely. Great time all around, really. Best of 1 was fine, I think, if you played the best deck of the format, which was Dogs, like I did. Other people seem to have more of a problem with whether they went first or second. But, as far as I was concerned, if you're playing Dogs, you go first, you win. You go second, you're favored. So who cares?
Yeah, that makes sense. I I'm jealous that I couldn't go. I do think that the best of one format is one that scares me a little bit because it's a bit, in my opinion, it's a completely different deck building design, or making sure that you pick those type of decks that really take advantage of the best of one format. Dogs is begrudgingly, yeah, I do think it was probably really well positioned for that event. Um, Although we saw, what was the finals? It was two Blurples,
Two
wasn't it?
Blurple decks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So still a good deck, right? Blurple particularly has the option to like even out some hands with the addition of Wasabi against dogs. If you manage to hit them that Crom and they are stuck on it, they have to play it, you can come up from behind. But best of one is a high variance format. And in the same way that green blue final in Richmond, both of those decks would get eaten alive by any of the dogs decks that were, you know, if they had to play into them multiple times, right? The dogs decks are going to come out on top more often than not. That doesn't mean you're actually going to have to face one for the finals in the cup, right? So Blurple in the final. Yeah,
Did you see
surprisingly.
many other dogs players in the event?
So it was really interesting going between, we landed Friday morning. We did some testing Friday night at a locals, populated a lot by players who had traveled in that weekend to play in the event. There were a lot of dogs players in that room. On the Saturday for side events, there seemed like there were a lot of dogs players relative to the number of people who were in attendance. And then on Sunday in the main, it was like a normal share of dogs. So kind of the exact same thing that happened in Richmond, right? People said that people brought a greater number of dogs to the Friday side event and then did not bring it in as large a meta share in the main. And I guess that's just how it goes with the deck, right? I think in this case, a lot of the players who brought dogs on Saturday side events were bringing dogs anyway, but the players who attend the Saturday side events are sort of self-selecting for players who are more likely to play a more difficult and higher win rate deck like that than your average person who's attending the DLC, where I think 75 to 80% of the room are just going to play the deck they're going to play anyway, and aren't even necessarily looking at things like conversion ratios or meta breakdowns.
Yeah. But you managed to get into Top Cup with your deck. You did really well on this run. It's like 2 runs back to back. So you did Richmond and then you went into Hong Kong. So really glad to see that momentum taken forward. The top 32 game was the one that got you your invite?
No, so top 32 in this case won me a Simba, so equivalent to like top 64 in a bigger DLC, right? The 1,000-person cap. You can see sort of the photo here in the middle of that's actually my top 32 opponent. This is a photo from his team of him winning that match and celebrating. And I'm leaned over there on the table, scribbling down my notes about what happened in that matchup, how it played out, where I think it might have gone wrong. And unfortunately, that means I did not get the invite for the Asian Continentals at this event, but I had a really wonderful time, and I'm very keen to go back and play in more events in the region. The week after Ghent is DLC Taiwan, and I'm thinking about it now. So that's a best of 3 event as well. But boy, talk about a lot of travel. That'll be back to back.
Yeah.
Just from the other DLC if I do go to that. But
in the case of 4 weeks, you're going to be traveling to 3 different countries. That's insane. But let's talk about that top 16 game then, or going into top 16. So was it still best of 1 at that point? I think it was, right?
Yeah, so top 32. After top cut to top 64, there were 3 more rounds of best of 1. And so the way to really think about the format is it was 10 rounds of Swiss of best of 1 before a top 8 cut playing best of 3. And the only thing they did is they started eliminating people after 7 rounds. And so what this really means is you could be on a 5-2 record at that point and actually still be in contention by being part of the top 64 cut. Whereas if you were X2 in 10 rounds of Swiss into top 8, you're eliminated already. And so it's not really 7 rounds into top cuts. It's like 7 rounds cut for performance and then 3 more rounds of single elimination Swiss is how I like to look at it. But with the advantages of If you were the higher seed, you were on the play, and from top 32, it was open deck lists. So sort of a scale up as you went along that single elimination bracket.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you I know you have some thoughts into how that game went. Obviously, you didn't win, and that's heartbreaking to see because I know you put a lot of effort into this. But like, where do you think things kind of went wrong in that game for you?
So I'll do like a separate published piece of writing that has like a full breakdown of this game for people to read. But right, so we get the open lists. I get to see what my opponent's playing. They're playing yellow, purple mid range. They have sort of no way in their deck to threaten a turn one lady outside of like they're playing 3 Rafiki. Um, and so I open a hand that has like Lady, Daisy, Tramp 2, Chromacon Dellas, and some Uninkables. And so I tunnel vision in that moment on like a turn 1, 2, 3 play where I go Lady into Daisy Tramp, Quest for 3, and then play down the Chromacon. And I mull away my 2 Uninkables, I get some ink back, I sort of commit to this game plan. And what happens is I get stuck on 2 ink. I go to draw for my third turn to play this Chromacon down, and I don't have my opponent Mowgli's. They take the Dellas out of my hand, so I've got Chromacon plus some other Uninkables, and I draw another Uninkable, a Lady 1 cost, and I can't play my Chromacon. And so I have to play the Lady and pass that turn, and I don't actually get my third ink until something like turn 5. And then I top deck another Chromacon. And at this point, I'm just starting to lose the race, right? My opponent is playing out more stuff to board. I haven't really been able to quest out as effectively. And I end up losing this game by 2 lore. And the moment I thought that, I had a rough time of it, I got stuck at 2 lore and there really wasn't much I could have done. But, in discussing the game afterwards, with some of the guys on the Rare Hunters team, they're talking about like, why didn't you play the Daisy turn 1? The Daisy is a safe quest into all of the deck's 1 drops, guaranteed, not even just like the Rafiki. And I greeted the 1 extra lore from the Lady, because it's 7 over 2 turns as opposed to 6, and that ended up costing me there, right?
That's
I could
really
have.
interesting that the first decision you made of the deck was the one that ultimately like changed the way that the entire game played.
Yeah, and it's like a series of choices and outcomes, right? That I could have drawn an Inkable over the 2 turns, my sort of turn 2 draw and my turn 3 draw. Either one of those cards could have been Inkable, and they weren't. If I'd led with the Daisy, I could have just inked the Lady instead, and then possibly inked the Tramp and played towards the Chromacon that way, right? And had that extra bit of ink, played a little bit slower, but made sure that I got enough ink to actually play the game. Instead, I sort of took a greedy line and I didn't adjust as I went. And, in retrospect, I'm not sure that playing the Lady is ever the correct choice there when the Daisy is actually more resilient and preserves the ability to play Inkables. And so, I think I was really proud of my play all weekend outside of that. But ultimately, as much as I've practiced on this format and as well as I've done between DLC Richmond and DLC Hong Kong, I actually don't think I'd practiced enough, right? I just assumed I had a good yellow-purple mid-range matchup, even though it's a match that I drew in Richmond and, lost to here. I did not specifically test it before or after that event. And I was kind of just relying on what I knew about the deck and, my general happiness on dogs. And the reality is I probably should have known that Daisy is the 1 cost play you always lead with in that matchup. And I probably win this match if I play that Daisy on turn 1. And so that's a big whiff really that I probably could have prevented. So, even with everything, I've achieved over the last 2 DLCs, there's still more work to be done, right? I can't really be getting complacent when, I threw away an Elsa and a shot at, a Continentals invite there. So I think if I win that game, I have a good chance of winning the entire cup, right? That could have been a Mickey there It was a very green, blue, blurple favored top cut. I think I just cut right through that. I was 10th seed, right? I would have
It's
had favorable
it's a
play
soul
draw
lesson.
situations.
It's a soul lesson to learn, but I think those type of things, the road to victory isn't just paved by all of your wins, it's also paved by the things that you didn't do and the losses that you've had and how we become better players as a result of that loss. And I know that coming into the next testing for this format, we've got Axine and again very, very soon, like within 3, 4 weeks of now of the time of this recording. Um, I know that you probably won't make that mistake again.
I hope so. But it's hard to say. The only thing you can do, I guess, is test and test more.
Yeah.
You see players like Tiago, players like Fungus, who talk about how many games they'd had tested when they were winning the tournaments that they won, and really, that's the thing to be doing, right? This is not the time to be resting necessarily, right? This is the time to be looking over those new cards and getting in your early reps before these first couple of events, right? If you start testing now and you've got a healthy amount of games under your belt by the time we reach the CCQ, uh, well, we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see how we do there.
I think that segues quite nicely to the end of this video then. So there's no interview this week. It's just me and Justice talking. I hope you like that. Next week, we're going to be having a look at some of the decks that we've been thinking about that we think are going to be good into the format of the beginning of the set 11, and then kind of giving our thoughts on why we're picking that and how we think it's going to benefit. Yeah, so if you've made it this far to the video, thank you so much. If you've not already subscribed, please do it. It helps our metrics a ton. And the question of this week is, what is your favorite spoiled card for Winterspell and why? So let us know in the comments below. We will read all of them and we will discuss some of them in next week's video too. But that's everything from me. Justice, do you have anything to say before we leave?
Yep. Hit that like, give us the comment, and we'll see you next week.
Lovely. See you guys, everyone. Bye.
Bye.